we're not asking anyone to become psychologists. I know that's going to, I could immediately hear someone say, but I mean, I'm not a psychologist. I don't know these things. No one's asking you to be. But why should employers care about the mental and emotional well-being of their employees?
It's real. It's real. You know the deal. You know the deal. Come on.
Hey, it's Shantae.
And I'm Natalie, and welcome to What's the Deal, a podcast powered by The Norfus Firm. At The Norfus Firm, we solve people problems and have the great pleasure of working with employers all around the world on human resources and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Shantae's bopping her head. We're trying to be serious, y'all, but okay, we don't have to be.
It's the coffee. I had too much coffee again.
Yeah. It happens. Yeah. I actually texted you last night saying I took Nespresso. I had an espresso. Let's see what happens. I feel charged. And then I text her like an hour later, happened. Like I just was running in circles. I was like doing zoomies basically off the coffee, but no work. But welcome. We're really excited to be here on this topic, and excited is not because we're happy about what we're talking about, but we're excited to be able to at least bring our views to it. Mm-hmm. We had an episode really early in our podcast series. Oh, we were like baby podcasters, where it was called "Folks Are Not Okay." And when we think about the work we do, we see a range of people problems, mm-hmm. right? From as big and large scale as huge surveys where people are telling us how they feel about work, and we're largely hearing, and we often hear about, the things that are making them sad or upset, or and how that gets compounded by work, all the way to investigations where I'm dealing with very acute issues and where people have affirmatively lodged a complaint that has to be looked into. And one of the things that we keep seeing across all of this is folks are still not okay, right? Exactly. So we know from a study that Harvard Business Review did that in the last 10 years, there's been a huge increase in anxiety and depression. I think we've all heard that many times. But there was an interesting stat in a survey that was conducted by CNN and another organization that half of American adults under 30 and a third of the adults overall reported that they often or always felt anxious in the last year.
Wow, that's a big percentage. Half of people under 30?
Yes. And then a third of all of the adults
Yikes.
That were reviewed. So if that translates out, that means at some point, or at some part of your organization, you probably have pockets of folks who are feeling anxious, depressed, and having certain issues. Now, we can't go too far without shared language. As we all know, we love to make sure that we are talking about the same thing. Yes. So, Shantae, if we're talking about mental health, what are we talking about exactly?
Yeah. So, according to the ADA,
Americans with Disabilities Act, as the nerdy employment lawyer will inform you.
Thank you. Yes. Because some people may not know that, so appreciate that. According to the ADA, like mental health is really related to like psychological and emotional well-being and mental well-being. And so when you think about that in the work context, it's like, what does that really mean for employers, and how should they be thinking about mental health? And from an employer perspective, it's about really looking at prevention, identification, and then management of some mental health issues that employees may have. And we always say that you can't solve people's problems for them, but you can create a container. You can create systems that can support mental well-being. And so you're, as an employer, you're really looking at, okay, how do we help with stress management? How do we help with work-life balance? How do we help manage or create an environment where burnout isn't really as doesn't happen as often as it could possibly. So from that perspective, employers are really worried about that and providing resources. Like we talk about EAP benefits all the time. We talk about just ways to manage work that make things a little bit easier, because people are dealing with a lot nowadays.
Okay, so as a premise, we're dealing with emotional and mental well-being. Mm-hmm. And I know this is going to probably seem obvious, but I don't think it's so obvious because no one's actually cracked this code.
Right.
But why should employers even care about this? Especially because we're not asking anyone to become psychologists. I know that's going to, I could immediately hear someone say, but I mean, I'm not a psychologist. I don't know these things. No one's asking you to be. But why should employers care about the mental and emotional well-being of their employees?
Yeah, I think a big part of that is just harm reduction in general, right? Like how people relate to one another. We don't want to create spaces where people are harming each other actively. We were talking about this the other day, just the rise in just violence in general in workplaces. We don't want, if people are struggling, we really want to kind of head that off at the pass instead of just ignoring it or just pretending like it's not happening. So for me, the first always, because just in general, do no harm. So in general, understanding how people are showing up in terms of their mental health just helps deal with that. Like, what else are you seeing in terms of like,
well,
what it is? Look,
if we go back to thinking about the law, and I should note that my approach as a lawyer is to never start with what the law says, meaning right. You should make decisions that are best for your business. You shouldn't be making decisions solely because you get sued or so like that.
Yeah, out of fear.
Exactly. Right. Fear should not drive these decisions.
Yeah.
But I do think it's important to keep in mind that if you end up in a situation where there was obvious signs that someone wasn't doing well, and you haven't actually taken the steps to make sure you're digging deep into that, and something happens in the workplace, you're liable for that, right? And I think like that is just something that we should be thoughtful of. But even more so, if you're thinking about it from a productivity standpoint, if you have large swaths of employees that are preoccupied by mental health concerns, it really limits productivity. It limits innovation, right? And again, we talk about these things a lot because that's why, businesses are in business, right? To produce things, whether it be services or products. Right. And so if you have folks who are just in there at half capacity, just because they don't even have a space to think about it, it's going to affect your business. And it affects engagement. It affects whether people stay. It has that. It's one of those all-encompassing types of themes, I think.
So, we started this conversation off around just looking at the investigations that you do because you see it show up, and you always tell these great stories about what's happening in workplaces. And so what are you seeing as it relates to like the mental health issue that can show up in investigations that can kind of give us a sense as to how folks are doing in these organizations?
So I've been doing investigations for 20 years. And I love investigations because it's like someone pouring like 1,000-piece puzzle on my desk, and I have to put together, I'm not going to usually put together 1,000 of the pieces, but most of the pieces enough to see like what the picture is. And so I really do a lot of sort of reflection on like what are some of the themes that I see when it comes to those. So one theme that came out generally is that since the pandemic, I've had more complaints involving where HR people or lawyers are complaining than in the last 3 years than I did in the 15 years before that. And it's really relevant because I think lawyers and HR people are often trained to not have their own problems. We're here to solve other people's problems, and sometimes we forget we are actually employees of these organizations. And so there is a lot of burnout amongst HR professionals because they're like on the front lines of dealing with employee issues. So I found those things to be very notable. Like lawyers and HR people have complained a lot. People are complaining about like what could appear to most people as very petty slights. So what it says to me also is that, and we see this in our assessment work too, is that people have sort of lost the art of a productive conversation and of how do we talk to each other. And so things fester and then they blow up. And then the third thing is like there are, and again, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychologist. I put this in all my investigation reports. So when I describe behavior, I'm describing it from what I observe, not because I'm assessing people. But I have seen more behavior that comes across as like paranoid, that comes across as just like delusional. When I say delusional, it's like people are seeing facts from their perspective that are so far off from the ways that other people are seeing it. So, and the way that people take, one of the ones that stood out to me most recently was a situation where the complainant was alleging that he thought he was being forced out of his job because of his age.
Right.
And one of the examples and I had read all the documents beforehand, but I couldn't understand like what the reference was until I was able to talk to him. But they apparently had some kind of training on employment stuff, on, you know, how to document performance reviews or performance write-ups. And the trainer said something to the effect of, I know you guys are out in the field a lot, so if you need to catch up on discipline when you're back, you can do that. And then he's like, and now my supervisor is using catch-up in calendar invites. And I was like, wait, what do you mean? He's like, the title says catch-up, and it has our names. And I was like, oh, wait, you don't think that he just wants to catch up with you? And when people ask me, so you're like, wow, like I wouldn't even have put those two things together, right? And I don't think most people would, like just looking at an average person. And so when you look at that, he was very flustered. Well, I don't know what that means, but he's using ketchup. And I'm like, oh, but just to kind of soothe him, I'm like, oh, I use ketchup with my team as well. Like when I want to catch up with them on something, like talk about it. Right. And so when people in that situation, the trainer was like, well, what should I have said differently? I'm like, I can't even say that you should have said anything differently, because using the words catch up, I don't think you would ever think would trigger somebody, right? So some of these things are a little frightening, because like you wouldn't even expect that would upset somebody, like or make those kinds of connections, which again, that's new, like in the last 3 years. Yeah. And
what do you think is contributing to some of that? I mean, I obviously we come out of a pandemic. COVID still it's not gone, right? Like we're, I guess, managing it. But so we understand that people just are completely dysregulated, just coming from a central nervous system, right? Perspective, like you're completely off. So, but what else is happening, do you think, in the world that is causing people just to not quite be okay? They're not okay.
Listen, my hypothesis is that the lack of attention to mental health and social well-being from the pandemic is compounding on top of itself right now, right? It's interesting because I'm always trying to talk to psychologists, say, like, what are you seeing, right? Because, like, the people who actually do this, and there's a lot of similar thoughts, right? Like, there was no break from that constant fear of being sick and dying, right? Or watching people be sick and dying. And then this weird cognitive dissonance with leaders of still expecting the same things from people. Like, that is the thing that is actually most mind-boggling to me, is this, like, it's almost like if you're in a relationship with like a narcissist and they yell at you and then the next day they act like nothing happened. Right. And you're like, you just barked at me yesterday. Stop playing. You're going to act like you're going to make me seem like I'm crazy.
Yeah, now we're going to talk about this. No.
What have you been seeing?
I think that people are overwhelmed a lot. Like, yes, the pandemic and the pressures that and the existential threats that came from that are rough, but I think on top of that, people are just overwhelmed in life.
Gas is expensive, bread is expensive.
The way these things cost nowadays, it's like, why? It's like Publix. We live in Florida, so Publix is like a big grocery chain down here for those who aren't in Florida. Publix is trying to be Whole Foods.
Exactly.
How do I go into Publix and spend all this money at Publix?
On 5 things.
Come on, guys. So it's like, you're stressing people out. Like, people are really stressed out. And then you go into work, and then there's technological threats. So you think about AI, where there's this idea that, this whole narrative that AI may come and take people's jobs. Like, you're dealing with all these different things coming at you. We got an election coming up in America.
An excessive amount of headlines.
It's a lot. It's too much. And people are going to short circuit. Like, their brains, I don't think our brains can really handle all of that. And so to that point, everyone's on edge, and any little thing is going to cause somebody to react in a way that might not be like the greatest way in a work environment. And so we're seeing that, especially like, we talk about political things. We're seeing that around the DEI work, right? Like, people are really definitely unhinged and anxious when it comes to DEI in a lot of ways. Like, for those who are against it, as soon as you say anything, they jump on it. And they got something to say, an opinion on it, and it doesn't work, and it's divisive, and it's all these things, and they're, like you said, barking on you. And you're like, but do you even know what this really is? And then the pro-DI folks are like, oh my God, they're going to take it away. Exactly. I can't believe. Guys, everybody just
And so
settle.
I think I think we talk about this a lot, but everything feels very loud.
It's oh
right?
Man, that's a great word.
If I get started on loud, Shantae's going to tell you how loud Miami is, but we won't do that in this episode. So we're just going to focus on this. But so if we're thinking about that, right? Because we also know, and while they may not be as comfortable being vulnerable about this, leaders are going through these same things, right? So it's not like these issues are related, are limited to people who are below a certain level.
Right.
Right. Yesterday I have four investigations going on right now, which is pretty wild, right? Because it's like you got to keep up with a lot of stories. But on one of them, got on with a woman yesterday. She's like, I am so sorry. Like, I only have like 23 minutes because I actually have to take my daughter to school. And I was like, we can reschedule. Yeah. She's like, would that be okay? I'm like, absolutely. Yeah. I'm a mom. I know how stressful it is to get your kid out of the door in the morning. I'm not about to try to interview under duress. Right. Like, this is not that kind. Like, this is not cops and robbers, right? Like, we can totally reschedule. But I think this gets us to a point we talk a lot about. What can employers do? What is within their sphere of influence to help, like you said, head off some of these issues?
Well, I think the biggest thing with everything is awareness and acknowledgement. Like, you gotta be real. Like, people are not okay, and it has to be like something that you really think about and are conscious about and want to provide support for and solutions for. So, walking around like people are just gonna have to figure it out and they're gonna
and they don't want to work
and that's not no.
Do you know that? No, can I just make a little PSA? Leaders, please stop saying people don't want to work. Right. They don't want to work the way you want them to. They don't want to feel like that your thumb is on top of them, that they're a cog in a wheel, that they have to live to work. This is literally what people are telling you, right? This response of, well, people just don't want to work anymore. It is trash. We have to retire that.
So dismissive.
Because it doesn't allow for the awareness.
Right. There's a thing there that you don't want to really explore and investigate. And so it's just easy to be very flippant about it and be like, oh, no, they just don't want it.
They're lazy.
No, that's not it at all. People want purpose. They want something to get them going. They want to contribute in a way, right? But not like this, not the way you have these organizations set up. And again, we speak in generalizations, but that's not every organization. That's not everybody. There are some organizations. I saw a list recently. I think Barclays was on there that actually are very conscious about mental health and supporting folks' mental health and setting up systems that can support that. But it takes a lot of conscious effort, and it takes folks wanting to, like everything else, like the DEI work, like a marketing effort. Like anything, it takes effort. It takes people being intentional about wanting to support this because they understand the impact that it can have by not doing this on an organization and then not wanting to realize that impact. So they're going to put the systems in place that can support actually the opposite, what they really want, which is healthy employees in their workplace. And
look, I think we've talked about this before, and it still continues to be true, that it's really, really important to assess workloads.
Yeah.
What do people really need to be doing to advance the goals? Because, and again, I'll happily repeat things that I know are true and work, which is that if people don't have the time or the space for their brains to even just pause. Santiago and I were talking about this earlier.
She used his whole name.
Dang, sorry, Santi. I got very motherly and auntie in that moment, like all at once. I was like, Santiago, like, Santi.
We don't know who that is.
But Jack, you need time to just think. You were saying that yesterday. You didn't have a lot of meetings yesterday. You just need that time to think. Yeah. And if we are maxing out employees' capacity to think, it not only adds to the stress because people never feel like they're doing enough. They never feel like they are enough. They never feel like they always feel behind. That creates those issues. And the other piece is that when people don't have space, you don't have innovation. I saw this really cool quote the other day, and to paraphrase it, it was like, if you don't have time to wander, you never get smarter. Wow. Right? That's my quote, which actually is cute. But that was my paraphrase of what they were saying, is that idea, like you need space that's not filled, that you can stop and you can think. So I think the one thing that we talk to employers a lot about, and we'll keep talking to them about, is pause and reassess, right? Can you have a no meeting Tuesday? can you decide based on data, right? Some awareness of like, if you're surveying your team, to give folks an impromptu day off where everyone's off. We're actually doing that.
Yeah.
You know, we're very vulnerable with y'all about, we get burnt out too. And, you know, we deal with people issues all day, every day. So we're really thoughtful about, you know, how do we resource ourselves? And Shantae and I were talking, and I was like, we need a break. And look, everybody has PTO, and they can take their own vacation time. But I do think that there's something very valuable about taking a break together, because then no one is feeling like they're letting someone down. Because that's another thing about time off that we hear a lot about. Yeah, but if I take the time off, then this person's going to have so much more work. And then I'm going to come back to 300 emails. And that whole thing where it's like that produce. But if everybody is off together, there's some pause to the influx of emails and texts and things that need to be done. And so we are taking a spring break. For that reason. And then Shantae and I also talked about, you know, holding ourselves accountable. Is like, how do we help the team not get to that point where we're sensing that we need that kind of break?
Yeah. When it comes to managing the people, it's really, okay, so you have this workload. What's realistic? You know, I work with two of our colleagues here, and it's, you know, we talk all the time about, if it feels like it's too much, I need you to tell me.
Correct. Because
Natalie and I go. So we're going to constantly be like, let's do this. Let's go do there. Can we do this? Can we improve that? We're always talking about.
Can we run a marathon in between?
And these knees, absolutely not. So slow down. Okay. And so that's what we want to do with our team. What's realistic? And
that part though, the intentionality is, you do your job, so I trust you to tell me how long you think it's going to take.
Exactly.
If I say a week and you're like, then tell me that. And I think as managers, we are encouraging you to do the same, right? So the people who are the middle managers push back on your manager, like, be real. I think our last point here was like, how do you resource yourself? Speak up.
Use your voice. You have to use your voice and say, this is too much. And then, but also have like a solution to it. Okay, this is what I can do, and let's talk about it. Let's negotiate it. Let's figure it out.
Correct.
But you got to use your voice. And if you don't find that you're in a place to do that with your manager or your supervisor, find a way to advocate for yourself in some way, shape, or form. And then if that isn't an option, unfortunately, in organizations, because sometimes it isn't, you know, you got to figure out your resources outside of that. So what are your support networks? Where does it feel safe? Where can you get quiet? Where can you feel supported to really be able to take care of yourself in a way that re-energizes you in some way, shape, or form? And it changes. We're not the same person every day. So sometimes one thing worked a couple years ago or a couple months ago, and then it doesn't work anymore. And now you're like, okay, so what do I do? Just keep searching for that thing, because it's important for us to take care of ourselves. It's the whole analogy of, you got to put your own gas mask on first. You can't
gas mask?
Yeah, or oxygen mask. Sorry, not
girl,
a gas mask.
Where are people?
We're not trying to take anybody out that way. Please don't put a gas mask on. Oxygen mask. Isn't oxygen a gas, though? Anyway, that's disregard chemistry classes from a very long time ago. It's an element.
Listen.
But anyway, the mask in the planes, that one.
You have to take care of yourself first.
Is the point.
Yes. And I will just say, sometimes that means the place you work is not for you.
Yeah.
Right? And because at the end of the day, without the space to take care of yourself, all of it's a theory. And I think we harp on space so much because employers will be like, oh, yoga. And you're like, okay, but you need time to do yoga. You need time to do EAP.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You need time to call, set up an appointment, do the appointment. And if you always feel like every minute you're stealing minutes, like it just can't, it's not going to happen. And I know that we've talked about this before, but I think also it's, you know, just on the DEI front, you know, underrepresented groups, marginalized groups are facing unique challenges on top of what we've talked about that I think are generally applicable. And that gets compounded again. Two of the four investigations I'm doing right now are involving underrepresented folks feeling like, you know, they're not seeing themselves at the top. So these DEI things that we do strategies for are showing up now in internal complaints, right? Where now you're assessing whole HR departments. Like one of these is dealing with a whole HR department, which is not the first time I'm investigating a whole HR department, right? So, you know, it's just, when I say whole, I mean 100+ people. So not like, you know, one or two people. So I think it's understanding that, if you're not thoughtful about these people issues, they can really take you down in some tough ways. So look, there's solutions, self-awareness, and that's awareness of a self as a leader, which we have talked about at length, awareness of self as an organization and where everybody stands, assessing what you can do to impact without thinking you have to solve all your employees' problems. That's not what we're saying, but we are saying what you can impact, please do. Yep. If you yourself are tired, probably you can multiply that out across multiple folks on your team and in your organization. And all of this requires intentionality and being thoughtful about what your data and your own organization is telling you. Thanks for talking to us. We got lots more to talk to you about, and we'll see you soon. And subscribe.
Wait. Yes. Follow us on all the places.
Which are
subscribe
at What's the Deal on TikTok and YouTube. The Norfus Firm on Instagram. Also, What's the Deal on Instagram? Listen, we're a lot of places.
You could also just follow us. You can just find us. Just Google us.
Just Google us. Bye.
Bye.
Here it is. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and leadership. That's the deal when you know what you're dealing with.